I'm curious. Just the way they-
Because you're up on that.
Yeah.
Spangled. Okay, so you know where the school is? There, like you said.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, good evening, everybody. This is the meeting of the City of Harbor Springs, Michigan Planning Commission. Today is Thursday, August 15th, 5:30 p.m. local time. And Jeff, would you call roll for us?
Absolutely. Rick Tarczynski,
Here.
Vanessa Millen,
Here.
Emily Dubay,
Here.
Bob Thoma,
Here.
Tony Johnson,
Here.
Bill Mulder,
Here.
Mark Bidet,
Here.
Barry Lustgarten,
Here.
Nancy Rondell.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great, thank you very much, Jeff. Let's see, next thing on the agenda is approval of the minutes. Have people had a chance to take a look at the minutes from last meeting?
I move to approve.
Any discussion or any corrections? I second. All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor of approving the minutes from our last meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, meeting minutes are approved. Next thing on the agenda is public comment and correspondence, and this is the time where people can tell us what's on their mind regarding a topic that's not on tonight's agenda. And the only things on tonight's agenda are short-term rentals and window signage. So the rest is wide open. Does anybody have any thoughts or ideas that we ought to know about or think about? Yes, ma'am, could you introduce yourself?
Linda Rockwitz, 519 East Third Street. And I have a question. What happens if the repeal is passed? Are we left with no zoning code? Or do we automatically revert to the old one? Does anybody know?
I can answer that question. So we still don't truly know. Victor, the city manager, and Jim Rayburn, the attorney, are looking into that. They're doing some research, and more than likely staff is going to prepare a memo to come back to the planning commission at our September meeting with some clarification and answers to address those concerns. But at this point, unfortunately, I don't think we have the answers for you yet.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, Jeff? I can't see who's on Zoom. Do we have a?
We do have a couple people on Zoom. So if anybody online would like to speak, please let me know.
Okay, doesn't sound like anyone else in the room have anything to talk about? All right, thanks. And let's get on to the public hearing on short-term rentals. And to open the public hearing, we need a motion from someone on the planning commission in a second. And then to open the public hearing, and then we'll vote on it, and then we'll be open, and then we'll do the opposite when it's time to close it.
Make a motion to open the public hearing.
We've got a motion. Is there a second? Second. We have a motion and a second. And all in favor of opening the public hearing on short-term rentals, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No. Public hearing is open. Jeff, you okay over there? You're
Yeah, I'm not sure why, but our video camera is ending our video broadcast. All of the information is still being streamed, but just the view of the room for our video is, for some reason, it keeps turning it off. So I apologize to anybody who can't see the room.
So for folks online or folks who are watching after the fact, for some reason, you can't see faces in the room. But you'll hear it and we will show every document. Okay, so the public hearing is open. And Jeff, do you want to set the stage for us on what the goal is tonight?
So we have a brief meeting each year, public hearing, to discuss short-term rentals, how to hear feedback from the public on how things went over the course of the year. If there's any need for any updates to our regulations or our recommendations to city council regarding how we might like to change that process for the following year. Specifically, staff has some questions that they'd like cleared up for administratively how we're handling a couple situations due to the changes with the zoning code update and change. Specifically, that is in reference to the limit that we have for single-family neighborhoods. As we discussed in my previous memo, that was limited to 63 in the R1 districts. In the new zoning code, the R2 district has been rolled into with the rest of the R1. So we have 9 other short-term rentals that have been kind of combined into the same neighborhood as the 63, basically totaling 72 now at this point, 69 of them being in RN, and then 3 of them being in RW, which total up to the 72. So I guess the main question that staff would like to be part of the discussion is administratively, how do we handle that as it relates to the wait list? To provide an example, we have the 9 that are, let's say, grandfathered in from the R2W or R2 zoning district, which brings our total up to 72. So let's say that I have a short-term rental currently and Tony is on the wait list for a short-term rental. And I decide to give up my short-term rental property. That would normally bring us down from 63 to 62. We would then reach out to Tony, who's next on the list, and say, Tony, we have a license available for you. In this situation now, we've brought in the R2 property. So Emily has a property in R2. So if she gets rid of her license, do we then make that available to Tony? Or do we basically say we're not going to issue any new licenses to people on the wait list until we've gotten all the way from the 72 down to the 6 to below 63? Or do we treat those 9 that are grandfathered separately and ignore them for purposes of looking at the wait list and making licenses available, and just have them through our attrition come down and have anybody else in those areas added to the wait list and getting licenses normally? The other thought is we've now increased the land area that's part of our restricted zone. Do we readdress what the total number of limitation is on that now larger area? Do we increase that to 72? Do we leave it at 63? Or do we set it at some other number somewhere in between, or higher or lower, as you guys see appropriate? And Tony, you asked at the last meeting how many we had, and I did include that in the memo.
Could you finish that thought? So
Yeah, so at the previous meeting, Tony asked a question of how many licenses we had at the time when we had adopted the limit of 63, how many were in the R2 district at that time? We have 9 now, and I believe, did I put 7?
Yep.
Yeah, there were 7 in that district when we established that limitation.
All right, any questions for Jeff or
No,
before we open it up?
my memory, I seem to recall that we had a consensus that most people agreed that we would leave those 7 or 9, whatever they are, as grandfather them in, so that it wouldn't affect anybody on the waiting list. And as they dropped their licenses, there would just be 1 less in that area grandfathered in. That seemed to be the fairest thing for everybody, because there weren't any on the wait list in that area. We don't want to increase the number of short-term rentals in town. We set it up for a certain number for residential districts. We didn't set it up to a geographical location. So although we've increased geographically, it's still a residential district. And I think we should be keeping at the 63 number and just keep the 9 separate, and they continue on. If they drop their license, then there's only 8 grandfathered in, and it doesn't affect anybody on the waiting list when they're out. It seemed like that was the most practical and fair way to go about it.
Yeah, as I recall, that was one of the solutions that we were discussing last time and kind of coalescing around, but the main thing tonight is to get some input from our residents and then for us to reconsider. And there's something else that we got to do, and that's conflict of interest on short-term rentals. So are there any members that have any possible concerns or want to raise possible conflict of interest for us to consider?
Well, my usual position, I have a short-term rental, but now it's in the CBD. It's not in a residential area. So I need your permission to participate and to vote if we vote on something tonight. And I'm fine either way. I could just go home early tonight too.
And Mark, do you feel you can make an impartial decision?
Oh, absolutely.
So I too have a short-term rental license. It hasn't been activated yet as far as being used. There's no listings yet on it. I just have it to have it. So.
So you're a current license holder
In residential.
in a residential area. And do you believe you can make an impartial decision?
I
And
do.
have an impartial discussion?
Definitely.
Members of the planning commission, how do you feel about this? We could ask these two members to contribute to the discussion only, or they could discuss and they could vote.
Can I ask, are we planning on voting on anything tonight?
We don't have to, but we could, we may. So, you know, our discussion may lead us to that. We may feel the time is right. And then we would vote.
I think it's fine to be in discussion. I think that's great. I also feel, not to make it complicated, but there's no problem with Mark voting because he's in CBD. It doesn't really affect those licenses at all. Barry, somebody might have a problem.
That's exactly the direction I was going to take as well.
Not that Barry can't make a non-part, he could do that, but it might not look.
We're living in a different world than we were last year.
So where does that lead you, Bob?
That maybe Barry should step down or not vote.
No, I think discussion, there's merit to someone
Yes,
in a residential.
Yeah. just not vote.
If you're someone that has a license, there's a lot of merit to
Yeah,
it.
I think that's.
All right, well, the way our rules read, if I remember correctly, if even one member has a concern about that, then the member in question is ruled out. And so just to clarify, are we in favor of Barry discussing with us and contributing but not voting?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, Barry, those are your instructions.
Yeah.
Mark, you
I'm good with
are
that. Yeah, that's great.
in for discussing and for voting if we do vote. All right, everybody good with that?
Yes.
Great. Okay, well, let's go to the public then and get some input on the question. Folks in the room, do you have any thoughts for us that we ought to consider? Yes, ma'am.
Like to go through the Becky Backus 500 West Summit. Several years ago, the limit was 61. And then we had this conflict with two owners. And they, it was cheaper to give them a license and go through litigation, correct? Okay, so they got to 63 and you changed the group changed the code to increase from 61 to 63. And at that time, there was discussion that maybe we need to change that and go back down to 61. But it just seemed to evaporate. It's only me bringing it up. So now I'm learning there's 101.
Let me provide some clarity if I may, because there have always been more than 61 or 63 licenses within the city of Harbor Springs. The limitation of 61 or 63 was only ever placed on short-term rentals that were located within single-family neighborhoods. We've always had more additional short-term rentals that were located within the central business district or other multiple residential neighborhoods, adding to higher than that number.
So then if we take baby steps and not include the grandfather people, is the central business district, is that where they are?
No, they're located in R2, or what was the R2 zoning district. R2 zoning district was previously a zoning district that allowed for duplexes beyond single family use. Some examples of areas where that was on the east side of town along Main Street, on the south side of Main was an R2 district. Another R2 district was the southeast corner of Main and Traverse Street. The north side of Bay Street, across from Wallstrom.
They currently have, these places currently have.
So those were neighborhoods that under the old zoning code were located in districts where there was not a limitation on the number of short-term rentals that could be in those neighborhoods. And under the new zoning code, they have been evolved and morphed into a new district that is including areas that were previously had a limitation.
Okay, so you're saying that, you're saying that the 63 is in a different zoning district than these other,
It used to be.
Was different, now the same.
So, I did a little research with Petoskey. They got 34. Some mostly in their central business district. They have a few that were grandfathered in their home, where the homes are.
They also have 10,000 apartments and 10,000 motel rooms that they lease by the week.
And it's not that far to Petoskey. Not that far. So we changed 61 to 63, that's written in stone. That needs to go back to 61. Worry about the other things a little later, no, maybe stop 61. And that 61 should really be maybe 40.
So that's your recommendation.
That's my recommendation, that's what we were talking about, and I think, when this all started with the short-term rentals, it was just, write a license. It was no thought to what this means. And I just finished going from door to door, it's amazing how many doors you knock on that are short-term rentals. A lot. I only know that because I went door to door. So it was very discouraging that we are now a town of that caters to outside people. We are not a town that caters to people, to us people. Another example of that is that where we're going away from people, us people, is the Christmas tree lighting. It went from Sunday, where it's just us, to Saturday, so we could include everybody else. So if you go down to tree lighting, it's like, I don't know each other either.
Okay.
So that's what I'm saying, you gotta get it down. So through attrition, I don't know how long the waiting list is. How many on the list?
13?
20?
13?
15? Okay.
I think that was included in the memo that I had.
13.
Yes, 13 people on the wait list.
For these 13 people, that's really a long time.
Okay. Thank you very much, Becky. Anyone else in the room care to weigh in?
Hi, Karen Oxfield, 1216 Timber Pass. I was just curious, if all the STR people had been contacted. So that they could be here tonight. I'm surprised hardly anyone's here. It's really discouraging. So you guys have been advertising it for a long time, but direct contact, were you able to reach them?
We've had multiple discussions about that, and it would probably be inappropriate for us to specifically reach out to short-term rental property license holders. We'd be stacking the deck of people in the audience, favoring that group as opposed to just putting a notice in the paper and letting everybody notice that short-term rental discussion is going to be had, so that people for, against, or anywhere in between has equal opportunity to come in and discuss.
Any other thoughts from the audience?
One more. 5:30 for this meeting is, people.
You guys hear me? I'm not sure if I'm on mute.
So the city council meeting is at 7, so people can get here. 5:30 is hard.
Planning commission's always at 5:30.
Well, I know, is there a reason why it's 5:30?
We set the schedule in the beginning of the year,
You're ahead.
take input from the community, and
So can we change it next year?
No.
Probably not.
So it's always 5:30.
And if it's important, they can be here. I mean, they come when
big
it's
crowds.
important. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Are
very
people
big.
who are on Zoom, are we muted or are we able to be
Why
part
don't
of?
we go to Zoom? Is there Christy? I'm looking at your name tag there.
Christy, if you'd like to speak now, go ahead.
Could you introduce yourself?
So what I'm trying to understand, so with. this new-
Ma'am, could you introduce yourself?
Oh, yeah, I'm Kirsta Gaudet. I live at 149 Snyder Street. So what I'm trying to understand is, it seems as though with the new changes of the zoning that are going into effect, you're sort of folding everybody in. And from what I'm hearing, you want to reduce the numbers, although it was my understanding many years ago when we started this whole process that it was 5% of the homes that were in the Harbor Springs zoning area, which at that time was about 2,000 homes is what the number was approximately. So, I understand you can walk door to door and it feels like there's lots of short-term rentals, but it's really about the full number and the percentages. And this is usually how the short-term rentals are decided in many, neighborhoods and societies and other areas. So, I guess I'm trying to understand why going down to 40 as you put all this zoning together, it's still the same amount of homes. So why would you want to reduce?
Okay, I take your question. And Jeff, why don't we clear up the data first? So in your memo here, you say that we have 1,365 real properties in the city of Harbor Springs. So that's significantly less than 2,000.
So
And
how did
are those
change?
Are those business and commercial properties?
Yeah, and that is all real properties.
Okay.
Yeah,
So it's business and commercial. So
it's business and commercial, because we do have some properties that are commercial that have residences upstairs that are short-term rental licenses, so.
and based on your calculations,
The number
with
change.
our 101 101 licenses for short-term rentals, that works out to 7.4% of our real properties have a short-term rental license. So that means that 92.6% do not. So just to get the data straight, and ma'am, did you have more for us?
Well, the numbers that I had were from your meetings like 3 years ago. So how did we go from like 1,900 to 1,300? So I guess that's where I'm getting confused. Because the numbers that we originally worked out for the original number of permits was on 5%.
Well, let me clarify that. So we've never had 1,900 parcels in the city. 5% was something that through discussions several years ago when we were first implementing the idea of creating a limitation on licenses, was based on what we were seeing in some other communities. And that 5% number was where we were making our proposed recommendation to city council And that proposed recommendation, if I remember it correctly, was 40 licenses, which would be approximately 5% of the 1,300 parcels that we have in the community now. City council opted to not go with the 40 because that would have meant that 20 to 30 people that had licenses would no longer be able to keep those. And that's where the number 61 came in, because that was the number of short-term rental licenses that were currently in existence in those areas.
Yeah, and I got bumped out too. So I'm like number 2 or 3 on the waiting list and hoping that I'm gonna have an opportunity, but you know, I mean, the area that we live in, there's like nobody around. I mean, it's half the homes are empty all summer long. Wouldn't you rather have some people coming in?
Good question.
Thanks for your comments. We've got Margie Marks, who's been waiting to speak as well. Margie, if you'd like to chime in.
You have to unmute herself.
She
Oh.
did unmute. You there, Margie?
Right, let's, maybe she'll pop back in, but let's go to,
Robin Johnson.
Robin?
Hi,
Hello,
everyone. Robin Johnson at 440 West 3rd Street. Hope everyone's doing well. I can't see the meeting, so I'm not sure who it was who was speaking earlier. I wanted to clear up some misinformation. Somebody said it got bumped from 61 to 63 because the city did not want to pay the cost of litigating. I want to clarify that the city had the law that allowed the city, the code had not been passed until May 13th, or it did not go into effect until May 13th. So when people, and it was me, had their license denied before May 13th, 2022, is that right, Jeff? Anyone who had their license denied at that time, that was not legal to do that because there was no law in effect. That was why I sued the city, and that was, in my opinion, why it never went to court, because I would have won. The other thing, somebody said she went door to door and said everybody was a renter. I'm not sure how scientific this was, but we have 101 short-term rentals. There are people, I had people in this summer who were not short-term rentals. They were renters. So I'm not sure how scientific this question was, but for somebody to say everyone's a short-term rental, that's just misinformation. That's simply not true.
I did not say that. I did
Let's not have back and forth. This is her opportunity to speak.
He's addressing the planning commission.
Okay, I want to say we have, apparently we have 101 short-term rental licenses for every district. So we have 101 short-term rentals, and even people like myself, I've had a family all summer. It has not been a short-term rental, and it's been me so far. So characterizing things that every house is a short-term rental and that we are not local. I'm looking at my block. Everybody looking around me is an owner. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Margie, are you there?
Margie?
Okay, let's go back to folks in the room. Does this spur any other thoughts or advice that you could give us?
Yeah, I guess,
Could you introduce yourself, please?
Susan Jarrett, State Street, near the high school. Yeah, I guess I could. Yeah, I was the one who made the little density map with the circle. And thank you for looking at that, everyone, I appreciate it. And I was, it's just, someone said that everything seems to be tilted towards making things right for the renters and the investors. And us, neighbors are just, we never got a choice to, should we be a host? Should our neighborhood be a host for for tourists, they disappeared, you know, and we never got to, say, well, this maybe doesn't work well, we don't want this. No, you have to welcome them. And, you know, this was a neighborhood, a single family neighborhood, children and people that work. And it's very different having tourists and looky-loos walking by your house all the time. And it really has been a loss of familiarity. And very much, I just want you to know that it really does affect a neighborhood. And I live in one of the most dense areas. And I've lived here for 35 years, so I really noticed changes. So, and I had mentioned, I think on my map that, you know, communities do control distance. Holland, in fact, I brought their short-term rental agreement. Someone said it's not legal to do that, but if my property is zoned, blah, 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 I understand that there will be a limit of 25 properties that can be used as short-term rentals, and there has to be a 500-foot separation. So it's not illegal. And they've had this rule for a very long time. And 500-foot separation, we get the laser thing, it's really easy to measure. You know, isn't there any consideration for us? It's all about the investors. And I guess I would like for the planning commission to look at really the pros and cons of short-term rentals. I don't think that was ever done. It's just, they just magically appeared. I can read a couple cons. Shortage of housing that it has created, and I think this has been a new thing in 5 years that since Airbnb came on the scene. We're finding out that what's happening to our community. I mean, everyone's experienced, I'm sure, when you go to a store you thought was open and they're closed. Yeah, you go to the emergency room and what is it, 4 to 8 hour wait now? I mean, it affects everyone.
7 hours last night.
Okay, thank you, Rick. That's a lot. It used to be 1 hour.
What's that got to do with short-term rentals?
Oh,
You lost
everything.
me.
I mean, there's nurses and doctors that live, that work, that can't live here anymore. The hospital,
Talking about the thousands of
They
people
had
that
like-
own second homes.
they have 100 openings at the hospital. Job openings,
Do you know
and
why that
they
is?
can't find people because people can't find housing.
You should ask somebody that used to work there why that is. They'll tell you. It doesn't have anything to do with short-term rentals. Why are we? even
Well, no,
talking
it's
about this?
housing, it's housing. The housing it's making, it's an effect. I know the people that live in the houses that used to be families, and they worked in the construction industry. One lady was a nurse. That's a short-term rental now. So it does, Bob. Okay. Declining school enrollment, we all know about that. The disruption of community stability and breakdown of social fabric of neighborhoods. Those are some of the cons. What are the pros? What are the pros? You know, we used to think, oh, it brought tons of people in and they bought a lot of stuff downtown. I don't think that is quite what people think it is. A lot of people come in with a load of groceries, and you can look on the comments, oh, we cooked all our meals and it was great, the great kitchen. Our neighborhood, I can watch the houses, there's nobody in 2 of these short-term rentals, one near Rick. It was empty for so long. I mean, these short-term rentals are empty. They're not doing our community any good. They're not eating at the
Do we have
restaurants.
a
They're
time
not
limit?
buying ice cream.
Okay. You tell who's not on the agenda.
Is my time up?
Pretty much.
That's okay.
All right, we definitely get your point.
Drift.
Anybody else in the room have any thoughts for us to consider?
Tom Graham, 187 East Bluff. I'm actually the planning commission in favor of more people in town, more crowded, more houses. But you can go overall in favor of that, what your short-term rental do for you.
I'm sorry, did you ask us if we're?
I asked you if you're in favor of a more crowded town. You hadn't talking about these creating lots and making everything more dense. You use a proposed zoning code, don't you have that? Like you got L-shaped lots or flag lots, you called me talking about it one time, one of these meetings.
Tom, could you, we can talk about that, but would you give us your guidance on what you think we ought to do on this?
I don't know, I'm a little prejudiced because I'm in that business, as you probably know. But they don't all eat at home, I don't believe, I think they eat out and shop a whole lot, just like the rest of the resorters. We need people in this town,
Okay, so your point is they are beneficial.
yes, I believe they are.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Tony Blancato, Summit Street. Hope everybody's doing good. Thanks for listening to me tonight. I personally feel strongly that it's good to share. And I think that we live in a beautiful area. And I think it's amazing when we have people come in short-term rentals and we get to meet these people and they get to share our home with us. Who am I to say you can or you cannot do this with your own property? That does not make sense to me. I just don't understand that thought process. So my thought and my opinion is I say we raise it to 100 properties in town and welcome everybody into our beautiful town. And I'm just throwing 100 out there hypothetically, but let's grow our beautiful town. And of course, we have the wonderful planning commission to review things and go about it, but let's not limit what people can do and see that we all get to share. I mean, I just welcomed a friend up here and we went for a bike ride and he said, "This is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been." I said, exactly. And we're blessed to be part of this. And if somebody wants to come for a weekend and see and benefit the businesses that are downtown, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Question. Everybody in this room that's ever done a short-term rental on vacation, week, 2 weeks, someplace, raise your hand.
Not in a residential neighborhood, but yes, in a resort I have. It's a difference, very big difference.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
I just had a question.
Can you introduce yourself?
Kathy Monchel, 560 Sergeant Street. How do we still have an issue with unlicensed short-term rentals? Do we have any handle on that situation?
I think that, we're never going to get to the point where we have 100% compliance. Any of the short-term rental compliance companies that I've had conversations with, no one says that you will ever get there. Most of them aim to try and get you between 80 to 90% compliance. There's always going to be one or two that pop up that aren't licensed. You reach out to them, you work with them. And I think that we're probably there. I'm sure that we have a few that aren't licensed that we could, do some follow-up regulation with. But I think that we're primarily have a pretty good handle and control on the short-term rental situation.
So you're thinking maybe 10 or 15%. I guess I'm trying to understand 80% compliance. So that means that,
Let's say for the sake of argument that we're at 90% compliance and we have 101 licenses, then in theory, there could be 5 to 10 out there that are operating
addition
without
to
a
that.
license in addition to what we have.
okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood. Thank you.
All right, let's go back to Zoom. Robin's already spoken. We don't, Margie's hand is not up. So I think we've just about gotten all the input that we can tonight. Okay. Oh, here's a gentleman.
I have to leave in about 5 minutes to go help Tyler off downtown, and I just wanted to see if anybody had any questions before I left.
I do. Go ahead, Tom, go, you're probably gonna ask something.
What's your occurrence on incidences involving short-term renters?
I try to keep track, cause like, the guys know that I expect a report done if it's a short-term rental complaint. And so I reviewed them tonight prior to coming. We've had 2 this year, that 2 complaints. One was cars parked in front of a residence, and the other one was loud parking. I might have slipped one through the cracks, so for the benefit of my ear, it might be 4.
Any incidences have you responded to involving us?
Well,
Planning commission?
No, well,
What?
Yeah, of local citizens. We respond as, right now, we respond to as many local citizen complaints that we do to short-term rentals. Is that, like, disturbances and things like that? Does that answer it?
no, you lost me.
We,
You
like,
had,
you're asking.
you had 2 incidences involving
Short-term
short-term people. How many incidences have you had involving us? 2?
As far as our local citizens that live here year round,
Yeah.
we've responded to more.
Okay.
It's a bigger population, of course.
Yeah, yes, but that's the answer.
Right, for those who are gonna be watching this after the fact or who are online, that was Police Chief Kyle
Sorry.
Knight speaking.
that was basically my question.
Yeah, I was.
How
I
many
was-
specific complaints that you had to deal with short-term rentals that you had this year?
And they both were resolved.
And they were cooperative and.
Correct.
Okay. Sounds like we've gotten as much guidance as we could possibly get. I think it's time to close the public hearing, and we need a motion to do that.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
We have a motion to close the public hearing on the table. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Bob and Norma. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Public hearing is closed. Now it's back to the planning commission to take in this input and decide what's best for the community in this particular case. All right, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll jump in. You know, I'm really torn here. I see definitely both sides of this argument. We need people in town. And, you know, having people come on vacation, they're gonna obviously spend more money than perhaps they would, you know, in their own town when they're on vacation. Restaurants, stores, having fun. But, you know, also we do live in a town that has to be lively and vibrant. And it has to have a substantial year-round population to support the community, to have kids in school. So there's definitely 2 sides. So, you know, I see we have to have a balance, and finding that balance is going to be very difficult. And no one's going to get everything they want. I'm definitely torn on this issue.
I have a question regarding next month's conversation about how the zoning code is gonna affect things. Is that gonna affect, obviously, this decision as well? Is this something that we should put off until we have this conversation?
If we're ready to vote, I suggest that we go ahead and do that. It'll be a recommendation to city council. It'll probably be put on the shelf for a while, and they'll have to decide when or if to pull the trigger and to vote on it themselves. So we can do our work and just have it ready for them. And, you know, they may change it around completely or just a little bit, as has happened before, but I think we've got enough input that we could give them a recommendation and move on to the next topics. Well, let's go around the room. What, Tony weighed in. Tony, do you have a specific recommendation on numbers or?
Well, I think the approach that this group took last time was fairly sound to come up with a percentage of the population, or the number of properties is a very a reasonable approach. If we can, you know, maybe, I don't know if the research was done last time to identify what that percentage should be. We've thrown around 5% a couple of times, but I would definitely like to think that maybe there is a number there, or a percentage of properties, and we can use that as our guidance.
Emily, any thoughts?
I just want to appreciate everybody's comments. I always learn so much from the community and when you take the time to come, so. I do kind of agree with what Tony said. I know we originally had a percentage and we had given 40% to city council and then they tweaked it. And now, I'm sorry, did I say? What did I say?
So 5%, which was 40.
But
So
that's
how
yeah.
we came up with our
Right,
40.
so I'm thinking if now we possibly have a few additional, because of the R2, if we want to figure out what that new percentage might be, and kind of go from there and see what they might say. I think is a thought.
Yeah, we went with 5%. Studies showed 5%. Studies showed beyond 5%, you started having a housing crisis. And so I'd like to know what the 5% is with the R2 added on. We've expanded the RN now, but we had 5% last time.
Jeff, if we wanted to derive what 5% would calculate to in this geographic area, are we equipped to do that or?
Well, if we look at the total number of parcels that we have throughout the city of town with 1365. And and then 5% of that would be roughly, I think it's 68 or 69. Would be 5% of the total for the city. And then if we look at the approved licenses we have in the CBD, which is, in the business areas, which is roughly about 29, that brings us back down to 40. Which would be basically where we are before. The other thing we could do is we could separate this out and look at residential properties and pull out the commercial from this and see what 5% of that would be. I just don't have that data in front of me right now.
Why are gas stations and hardware stores and boatyards involved in this?
Because a lot of our central business district properties downtown are a commercial property where it's commercial on the first floor, but then there's a residential apartment upstairs. And the upstairs apartment is a short-term rental.
Okay.
So we have commercial properties that have short-term rentals. So that's why they're included in this.
Does
total.
it merit taking them out? Because we hear from folks that it changes the feel of community. So I'm really interested in those neighborhood numbers as opposed to the central business district.
I don't have a great way of really breaking that down because even if I can easily separate out commercial properties from residential properties. But that's still going to give us a number of residential properties that will include residential properties that are within the central business district. I don't at this point have an easy way of separating out residential properties just by zoning district.
Okay. Let's hold that thought for a minute and let's go around and see what other people are thinking. Bob?
I agree with Rick. Rick started it. And assimilate the other ones and begin to weed them out over a period of time. As they give up, that spot is gone.
The 9. The 9?
Yes.
And that's what we had kind of come to the somewhat conclusion of at the last meeting. If that's our answer, we don't have to take any action on that. If we don't plan on changing the total number of short-term rentals, the limitation for that's how it's automatically defaulted to right now.
I guess I'm thinking that these people signed up in good faith, expecting that something would happen down the road. And now Jeff can go to them and say, oh, you're done.
You can't.
No, I don't think.
No.
And I don't think that was ever our
No.
intent or
You can't
thought.
just make them go away.
No.
Yeah.
I think the idea was through our attrition.
So Bob, let me restate, you'd be in favor of, just keeping the 9 in their own pool.
Yes.
And letting those, reduce through attrition until we're done, and then keeping the 63 in the residential. Okay. Rick?
I always like the 5% figure. But city council would never accept that. They came up with the 60th. I think if we're gonna go to the extremes of trying to do the 5%, I don't see why we can't split out the commercial district. Because what we're trying to do is get 5% in the residential area. If it's a short-term rental in the commercial district, it's a business where a business is supposed to be. What we're trying to work around is businesses and where people live and want to have neighborhoods. So perfect world, I would like to see that, but I am willing to go with grandfathering those 9 in. When they die out, that's it. It goes from 9 to 8, and we're gonna have an attrition there and keep the rest of them at 63 for the residential districts. I don't agree that they bring a whole lot of money to town, because the house next door, when they come in with groceries, they come in with beer, they come in with wine. They sit and they drink, and then they leave. I don't see that contributing anything to the town's coffers. I mean, occasionally they'll walk down if they're here for Thursday music or something happening, but they never come back carrying bags. So I don't see them as a financial boon. I see them as a deficit in that if that was a full-time resident, they would be spending money downtown all year round instead of somebody coming in for 2 days and supposedly eating. But they cook. They're grilling outside my bedroom. They're drinking outside my bedroom, and it's all stuff they bring. So I think it's a hoax that they bring money to town, but I'm willing to go along with the 9 grandfather and keep the rest at 63.
Thank you. Barry, what are you thinking?
So I agree with Rick as far as this keeping the 63, the 9, when they fade out, they die out. I do disagree with Rick as far as the people are spending money. I mean, I do go to restaurants, I do go to the bars here in town, and it's pretty common to see an hour wait now in the summer where in the wintertime, that's obviously not the case. So I do believe they're spending money. Also, I do believe it's nicer to see lights on instead of the ghost town. So I think there's pros and cons on both sides, and 63 seems like it's been a good number. I think we took everybody's voices in consideration last year, and it seems like it's a good balance, and that's kind of where I'm at.
Thank you. Nancy, where do you come down?
I'm gonna take a little different tact. When we changed, I have a bunch of different thoughts. When we changed the zoning code, we're the ones that picked up the agriculture and the R2 zone, which always had those short-term rentals in them. And really, they don't create problems. I understand what you all are saying in your neighborhood, that it's a problem for you because you don't know your neighbors. I'm looking behind you. You also were hearing from folks all in that one little neighborhood. Basically, that's the folks that really are struggling with us are the ones that live up by Rick and on the summit. Am I right? I mean, Sue lives there. Yeah, and Becca lives there. And I know where you are too. Down here, I actually counted the number. We have more down here than you do up here, and there's never a problem with them. There never is. There are short-term rentals surrounding me. Some of the people don't use their short-term rental license, so the owners, they just have a license. There are a number of them in the condos. There are 2 across the street on Main Street from me, 3 across the street on Main Street, and they're no problem. They're no problem at all. So I don't understand totally, I don't have the same experience you guys do with your short-term rentals. I do know when we were talking about all this, we were trying to, correct me, Jeff, if I'm wrong, get this short-term rental away from the zoning code. Am I right? We talked about the enforcement then would be under this, we were gonna get this under the city code instead of in the zoning code for enforcement reasons. So I'm struggling with tying any of this to the old zoning code at all, to the R2 district, because now there's no R2 district. Those 9 that are, you guys are talking about grandfathering in, are in RN. They're the same district as the rest of them. So to single those out, I'm struggling with that whole thought process. Because now it's RN, it's not R2, and it's not gonna solve the density problem of them up top if you just, as the people in the old R2 district let theirs go. It's not gonna have any impact up top where the problem is. So I'm struggling with a lot of that. Also, a lot of these down here, some of these R2s are duplexes that were built specifically for that reason. And they don't create any problem down here. So I actually am in favor of hanging on to what we have. Take that number, whatever it is now, 72. Leave them be, roll them all in, they're all in one zone now. There's no differentiation. And as people let their license go, let somebody on the wait list get that license.
So what if it puts more in Rick's neighborhood?
Unless we do something about density or something else, it will.
Mhm.
I mean, that we're not gonna control it by dealing with just these. I don't see how that's gonna control what I'm hearing is a problem for the guys up top at all. I just don't understand some of the thoughts with the numbers of bringing them down. I don't understand. And I am sure that they put money into the community. And I think we're using individual examples of things that doesn't help us. Where Rick can say, you know, they never shop, the guys next door don't, but I can tell you the people across the street from me do. That doesn't really, we need to get some numbers if we're gonna use that for a reason, I think. To increase, decrease, keep it the same. I know Festival of the Book, those people use some short-term rentals all over town in the fall. And they do a lot within the community, for sure, for that weekend. So I'm at a little different point than you guys are with this.
Okay, sounds like you're favoring one pool of 70 some, what is the number, 70?
I think it's 72, is it, Jeff? That's outside the CBD?
I would have a problem with 72 rather than 70. Because of the difference between the 7 and the 9. So if we increase, I'd want to have that conversation.
But that's what was there when we.
Correct. Yes, if we're gonna draw a fair and equal line, we've got to draw it at the same reference point.
I mean, that's fine, but I think to be separating out the old R2 from the new R, I don't think we want to be messing with that.
Okay.
Mark. I'm in agreement with these guys on the corner. That, you know, I'm very comfortable with the 63. I'm just going back to when we had all these conversations 2 years ago. And we just beat the heck out of this thing. And we ended up at 40. The city council bumped it up and ended up at 63 at the end of the day. And so in my mind, our original recommendation already got increased by 50%. So I'm comfortable with the 63, holding on that, letting the 9 just disappear over time. But I'd like to add in a caveat, because one of the reasons we have, and I think Bob, you mentioned it earlier, that we have the demand for short-term rentals is because we don't have hotels. We don't have motels. We don't have any of that. It's very limited. And I don't want to do this now, but I'd just like to suggest that we consider in the future, maybe revisiting the requirements for hotels and motels and making them perhaps a little bit easier to obtain. You know, if our CBD district stays that it is now zoned, I think there's a lot of opportunity for people to create small boutique hotels. And that takes some pressure off, let the market figure it out. But and I'd be willing to, you know, put some work into that at some point in the future. But for tonight's conversation, so that we can give direction to staff, you know, I'm in agreement just holding at 63, let the 9 go away. And we'll probably revisit this again at some other point in time. But I think our reasoning in the very beginning was quite sound. And we're not hurting anybody by taking these 9 away. These people get to keep them. And then we'll get closer to the 5%, because it's just looking at those general numbers. If Jeff breaks out how many residential properties we have and how many short-term rental licenses we have in those areas, it's probably gonna be higher than 5%.
It's.
I mean, you just look at the numbers, you sort of see,
Yeah.
yeah, you gotta see how that's gonna go pretty quickly. So, you know, I like the idea of 5%. Maybe that's something that we work towards in a long-term plan, but we can have a goal of that, but we can help people develop ways to take the pressure off and the demand for short-term rentals. You know, because, you know, and then let the economy figure it out, but let's open up the doors so that can happen.
Or bed and breakfast.
Or bed and breakfast. I mean, there's a lot of cool things that can happen that weren't necessarily promoted very much back in the day. And I think we've shifted quite a bit. And I think that's something that can be looked at not tonight, but in the future.
Great. All right. I have a few thoughts too. I am really sensitive to what Mr. Blancato said about, you know, property rights. Somebody owns this property. And we talked a lot about property rights when we discussed the whole zoning thing. And there are a lot of different views on that. And, you know, these people do own these homes and they believe there's value to them and their families in renting them out. And I'm very, I'm in sync with that. On the other hand, there are neighbors that say my property rights are being violated. This is not what I signed up for. I signed up to live in a residential neighborhood. I want to know my neighbors. Boy, it's been in the 4 years we've been talking about all this stuff. We keep coming to the fact that we, you know, have to come up with some type of a balanced approach because it's just not going to satisfy everybody to go one way or another. And towns all around the world are coming to similar conclusions, and they've come up with some limits and licenses and structure in that. And so I think we're in the right place generally still doing that. And what we're down to tonight is really just numbers. And I could support the grandfathering of the 9, keeping the limit at 63, or I could easily support just rolling those in and making the number 71, is it?
Well, it's 2.
So it would be
72.
72 unless we have the conversation about how it was
Yeah.
7 originally, and
Okay.
then it would be.
Yeah, so 72 or 63. This isn't a precise science. And, yeah, I could support either one. Okay. We started at this end of the table. Have you had any additional thoughts since other people commented?
Well, so I wasn't on planning commission at the time 5% was established, but if we assume 5% and 40 were the rough ballpark numbers, that would have meant 800 in the old R1 area. So if there's another, say, 100 properties in R2, maybe 50 ballpark.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's call it 900 for round numbers. 5% of that's gonna get us to what, 50? 900, no, 45.
45.
Yep. So I would be against increasing above the 62 that's currently established. That puts us at around 7.5% or somewhere there.
Emily and Vanessa, any second thoughts, other thoughts?
Like always, I love hearing everything. It does make you rethink, and I see all the sides. I'm kind of torn, you know, I really am. I like, you know, we said we've done all the work before, but then, yeah, do we go back and try to get it back down to 40%? I kind of feel like I'm my echo. I don't know. Okay. Scary. Okay. So I kind of think I'm good, kind of where what I said before.
Which was?
Which I just kind of feel. What did I say? That I kind of like the 40, and then seeing about what the new number would be, right, with the additional 9 or 7, right? Something like that.
5%.
Yes,
Okay.
right, that.
So you favor a lower
Yeah.
number? And Vanessa?
I'm in favor of a lower number, but I certainly get it. I can support, the licenses that we have and then through attrition, the 9.
All right. Sounds like, we're starting to get a bit of a consensus. Anybody would like to, stake out a motion and see how we come down on this?
But do we?
If you're not proposing a change to the number of licenses and you're proposing to leave them grandfathered in, no motion needs to be made because that's what we're currently set to.
Okay.
We would only need a motion if we wanted to deviate and do something else.
Right. Okay, so if we.
A motion to,
We make
I have a motion.
We make no motion, we take no action, then the plan is that the current 63 license holders continue on, current 9 license holders continue on. As long as they want to, they can renew year to year. And then city council can decide if they want to make any changes to that approach or if they don't. Do we need to vote on that? No, we don't. If that's our approach, we don't need to vote on it.
If your consensus is that what we have going currently is still satisfactory, then I don't think we need any motion. It would just be a motion if you had any recommendations to change anything.
I think we leave it be, because if we try to change it, council probably keep with what we got anyway, so. Why do the runaround?
All right, sounds like we'll do not have a motion. We're not gonna have a motion. So,
Plan is to not plan.
yeah, Jeff, so what's the proper disposition? Do we just,
I think consensus of the planning commission is that
leave the ordinance as it is?
to not make any changes to the ordinance as it is.
Okay,
Is that what I'm getting?
do we have consensus on that?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what we have, Jeff. Thank you. Members of the public, thank you very much for helping us think this through. It's tough every time. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Okay, next thing on the agenda is signage, window signage. Jeff, what do we need to know about that?
So for a little bit of background, the planning commission subcommittee has been reviewing signage. With the adoption of the new zoning code, one of the things that we're looking at doing is removing signage from the zoning code and having it be a standalone, its own resolution that would be under the city code. So we've been reviewing some changes and updates to that. Not that we're proposing to dramatically change regulations, just cleaning up some things to make sure that we comply with some changes in court decisions over the last few years in how we regulate some signage things. I think predominantly we've been looking at maintaining and keeping our signage regulations very similar to what they currently are. One thing that we have looked at is one potential way to change how we are regulating signage that is currently in windows, stenciling, decaling, that would be on a window. Under the old signage language, basically we have the width of your building. You have a percentage of the width of your building that you can use for signage. We then have a number of signs that can be on the face of your building, and that includes signage that would be displayed in a window, right? With the new zoning or with the new signage language that we're proposing, we're looking at potentially changing that so that instead of looking at signage that would be in the window and counting each sign individually, instead looking at it as allowing a business to occupy a percentage of their window. I think it would be a much easier way to analyze that. It provides businesses a little more leeway in how they might do that. With the current situation, if the limitation on the number of signs, they might have a few small signs and they quickly hit their number, but their percentage is very low. American Spoon has been gracious enough to let us use them as an example. I do want to caveat that the descriptions or the pictures that we have here, that's not signage that American Spoon has asked for. This is not a request for signage. what we've done is we've taken a picture of American Spoon, and if we look at the image on the far left here, that is the signage that they actually have. And so what we've done is we've photoshopped in what different percentages of window coverage could look like. And the idea here is to arrive at some percentage of maximum window coverage that we feel is appropriate for businesses downtown. And we previously, I think at one of the other meetings I brought in, and we had pictures of basically every single business downtown and what they were currently doing. So this first slide is basically showing us what 25% of window coverage could look like. Far left is the original, middle is just basically blocking off 25%, and then the far right would be 20% window coverage with decals up the window there. The next slide here is what 50% window coverage could look like. Basically, again, far left, original, middle, just blocking in half, and then far right, what 50% decals covering the window could look like. The last one is 75% coverage. So realistically, I think what we're looking for is if Planning Commission has any thoughts to provide to the subcommittee of some type of a level of maximum window coverage that they feel would work best for our downtown businesses.
Jeff, is the original, how it is, the original, is that like 10%? Do you know?
Probably, yeah, but 10 to 15, it's very minimal. A number of businesses, that's probably where they're at with window coverage. I do have some minutes from the DDA. They had their subcommittee review these same slides that we're looking at. They had a subcommittee meeting, I think a week ago. They had their DDA meeting yesterday, Wednesday. And they had a couple of recommendations or requests of the Planning Commission when reviewing signage within the DDA. One was they felt that 25% window coverage was probably what they felt more comfortable with. They did have a concern regarding one type of business that we have in town that might be negatively affected by this, and that's the realtors with their real estate listing sheets. When we do the calculation, that probably would exceed 25% window coverage. And they were certainly concerned with the effect that this regulation might have on them. The other request that they had was looking at projecting signs, which are not necessarily part of this discussion with window signage, but right now projecting signs count against the total width of the building and the maximum signage coverage they can have for other signs on the building. And they were requesting that window signs or projecting signs be pulled out of that percentage equation.
What's a projecting sign?
Projecting sign would be a sign that sticks out from the building. So for instance, American Spoon on the picture here, that's a wall sign. That sign is flush with the building. It's mounted right up against the wall. In order to see that, you have to turn and you have to look at the sign on the wall of the building. Whereas Touring Gear has a sign that projects out from the face of the building.
Okay.
And so as you're walking down the sidewalk, you can look up and you can see the sign. Usually there's something on both sides of it.
Okay.
Many businesses downtown have projecting signs. Right now, when we look at the signage that's on a building, not the windows, we basically state that you have 75% of your linear footage available to you as square footage for signage. So if I have 20 feet of linear footage on Main Street, I have 15 square feet available for signage. So I might choose to have a projecting sign that's 6 square feet in size, and then I might choose to have another wall sign that uses the remainder. So one of the difficulties is because a projecting sign has 2 faces, we count both sides of that against their total. So the maximum size for a projecting sign, I believe, please don't quote me on this, is about 6 square feet. It might be 10. But let's say I choose to have a 6 square foot projecting sign. If we count both sides of that, I've used 12 feet. And so now in my 20-foot example, I only have 3 feet left over for signage to place on the building.
But they would like that out.
They would like that separated so that the projecting sign is not part of the calculated limitation. We could, of course, then if we feel that we need to adjust that 75% to some other percent to take into consideration that difference, that might be appropriate. Maybe change the 75 to 50 or some other number that you guys feel is appropriate.
And the DDA again recommended 25% other than realtors.
Yes, so they had,
So
and I.
they think we should take the realtors out? How do you?
Well, that's the difficulty. So, we've talked about this before. There have been a number of court rulings that basically state that, you cannot refer to the content of a sign when determining the regulations that that sign will be subject to. So if you're going to have different rules for a realtor, the only way to determine that that is a realtor sign is to look at the content of the sign to make a determination. And the courts ruled that that's illegal. And that's specifically is a great example because the original case that this stems from was they had one set of rules for retail businesses and then they have a different set of rules for churches. And the church didn't feel that that was appropriate and they're the one that took it to court and got this ruling. So this is a great example of exactly what we can't do is let's say have 25% window coverage for retail stores and then 60% coverage for realtors. That's exactly what the courts have said we cannot do.
You have different requirements for parking for different, same thing.
The reason that this all came about with signage was under the guise of, or the discussion of freedom of speech. So I think that's the reason why we can for parking when we can't for
Why are
signage.
we actually sitting here talking about governing? And impressing more rules and regulations and you must, you can't, you should, you will, you won't. I don't need to be protected from merchants who hang too much stuff in their windows and go out of business. That's their business, not my business.
Well, you
I don't want to be involved in
You want to
this.
keep the character of the city, so.
Well, let me, Bob,
I
let me,
disagree.
Buildings.
let me briefly,
I disagree.
Bob, let me briefly answer something. So one, we're not proposing regulation that we didn't have before that we will
Understand.
now. We've always had regulation regarding signs within storefronts.
My attitude is about the whole deal, not tonight.
But the other side of this is if you guys feel it's appropriate, you could say 100% window coverage is perfectly okay. That could be the result of your decision.
They ought to be able to figure out what to do with their businesses without us interfering and telling them what they can do, period. I just think it's more grasping, more control, more. Don't mean to get personal.
That's government for you.
Tony?
Well,
Yeah, I have a few questions. First of all, why is this a window issue rather than a face of the building issue? And
It was just a potential thought of how we could look at signage on the buildings, right? And just basically treating windows different than the wall of the building.
but somebody might have glass wall to wall, floor to ceiling, or they might have just a couple little windows. I don't think looking at window coverage is really appropriate for the different architecture of the city. So I don't, that's a statement. I'm not looking at having a debate.
And this is only, we have other regulation for signage that would just be on the building itself.
Okay.
Which would be the non-window areas.
Right. But again, not every store has the same amount of, proportionally to their facade, the same amount of glass. So specific questions then, are we talking about things that are physically on the glass, slightly behind the glass, or how far back into the store is this looking to address?
I think that we have some language elsewhere in the code that talks about that if you have things within a certain distance of the glass, that it shall be considered signage. And I believe that distance is 3 feet,
Okay.
right?
So mannequins in the window are considered,
So that's a display of goods. So if I have a mannequin and I have dresses and things like that, that is a product that's for sale. And that's not a sign.
You see, that's where I begin to disagree.
How can we-
Okay, so we're gonna call mannequins and shirts merchandise for sale. But you can't put a house in your window, so these guys advertise by putting pictures of merchandise. I claim that's their merchandise. You go by the bookstore and the whole entire window is covered with books.
If you feel that you wanna, instead of having this be signage regulations with window coverage and just have it be regarding everything, display of goods, all that into maximum coverage, you could look at it that way instead.
So Rick Spoon for the original storefront, they're over 25% with tables and things like that they have in a window because it's less than 3 feet. Is that correct?
But it's merchandise instead of.
Right.
Goods.
If it's merchandise, that's a display of goods and that's not under the signage language. Originally, that was how I treated real estate listing sheets.
Okay.
However, I want to say it was probably 5 years or so ago, we had some complaints about listing sheets and windows. And so the planning commission requested that we get an opinion from the city attorney.
What were the complaints that it was just too busy in the?
I want to say it was probably 5 to 7 years ago is when realtors started adding more listing sheets into their windows or lighting them for their displays, and we received
It
complaints.
just seems
about
like
that.
technology now with an app for real estate and things like that. You know, they do offer books and things like that for real estate listings, but.
But it was about that time when we had a complaint, the planning commission requested me to get an opinion on that. And the city attorney's opinion was that listing sheets were signage.
Tom, can you give me an idea? How much sales is generated by the use of your posters in the window?
Don't know, but we get walk-in traffic from that or calls and we do business, that's what we sell. And like, what definition of signage are you using, Jeff?
We'd have to pull it up in the code, but we have a definition for a sign.
Could you give me that, or is that in the?
I'd have to look it up in the zoning code. That would take me a few minutes. But I can certainly do that for another point.
Tom, do you feel it's a significant part of your marketing to have those listing sheets?
Yes. People look at them all the time, they stand in the window and go tap, 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 look at that, It's actually a nuisance for a bit.
Yeah, let's get some.
Can I add something to
Get some
that?
comments from the public? Yeah, okay.
When we first started coming up to actually think about moving here, it's one of the very first things we did was exactly that. And that was the first time we realized, holy cow, we could actually afford this. So let's
It's
do
been
it.
a long time ago.
No, it wasn't that long ago. No, but it really truly was the first time that we because you have to know about something to be able to research it online. And when we were walking through town, we're like, this is a cool place, let's check it out. And we saw some of those ads and we thought, wow, that's cool, that place, I could see myself living there. So just saying, I see a huge value in that.
Sorry.
Anybody else online or in the room have any thoughts on this one? When?
Wendy Reed, 539 East Bluff Drive. The realtors are not the only people who are going to be affected by that, because if you're selling a home, you're listing it with a real estate agent, you would want it displayed in the window. You're buying an ice cream cone at Yummy's, and for entertainment, you're gonna stop in all the real estate agencies on Main Street and look at what's in their window. Everybody does it. The problem you're going to encounter is Jeff didn't read you the verbiage that the DDA came up with their 25%, which was we recommend 25% with special consideration given to the real estate agencies, which then defeats the whole cleaning up this, for meeting court regulations. Because
Cleaning up what, I'm sorry.
Jeff, at the beginning of this, said that you were doing this to clean up the new court regulations. But now you open a whole ball of wax where the real estate companies are treated differently than any other merchant on town. And I am going to say, I agree with Bob. It stuns both of us. But I don't see how you're going to be able to regulate this to keep the real estate agents and all of their clients happy and yet regulate it for everyone else in town. And you're gonna have to increase your legal budget because someone's certainly gonna sue over it.
Thank you. Anybody online have any thoughts on this one for us?
Robin Johnson has her hand up. I don't know if that's left over from our previous discussion, but Robin, if you'd like to chime in? It could just be left over from our previous discussion.
All right. And Jeff, what do you need from us tonight? Anything?
We don't need to take any action. If you guys have any thoughts or direction that you'd like to provide as a consensus, we'll be meeting up with the Planning Commission Subcommittee again in the near future to further our progress on our signage ordinance. Just if we have thoughts or direction we'd like to provide to them for, how we'd like to address these.
Are we at a certain percentage right now as far as window signage?
Looking at, I don't have a hard number for you, like what the average is, but a lot of the businesses are very similar to what American Spoon has in their original, which is, a lot of them will have just like kind of something small along the bottom of the window like that. Some don't have any, some have a little bit more. It really kind of varies, but I would say that discounting the realtors with their real estate listing signs, setting this at 25% would probably bring 90% of the downtown businesses would still be in compliance. It's just the real estate listing sheets are probably the one thing.
Do we have a limit now, Jeff? I mean, why are we doing this? Is there a problem or do we have a limit that
We're just
people?
looking at a potential new way of looking at signage in windows. Signage in windows currently does require a signage application. And not to pick on the real estate organizations, but none of them applied for a signage application to install those listing sheets. And they don't comply with our current signage language right now.
Because right now it's counted as the total signage allowed on the front of the building. Is that correct?
Right now, there's a couple of things. one, there's a limitation based on the size of your building
Right.
creates a square footage
Yeah.
of the size of your sign. 4 to 7. And so there's the issue of the square footage of the real estate listing sheets and then the number of listing sheets would not be in compliance with our current code.
Okay, thank you. I was trying to figure out why
we're talking
why
about
are we
it.
talking about this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, go ahead.
I can see why we're regulating exteriors of the building. On the glass on the bottom where they've got their name, the placard above the windows, the lights. I can see that. I don't see why we're getting involved inside their building. That's their shop. They do what they can to do business. And we have no business inside the doors. We can regulate outside, fine. But once you're on the other side of the glass, that's their property and they should be able to sign it however they wish.
I think it's a by right
Yeah.
issue.
Would any member of the planning commission like to do a small research project before next time? And that's to look into why too much window coverage would be detrimental to a community. I don't understand it myself. And I guess this all, even this discussion presumes that it is detrimental somehow. And I don't know what that is.
What about businesses that close for the winter and paper up everything?
I don't know.
And then for other communities, bigger communities, it can be a question of blight. If they put a huge sign up that says, you know, closing, going out of business, bankruptcy. But that's not real estate either. I mean, that's that, so it can contribute to blight in a downtown area.
I'd like to learn more about it. Would anybody like to try to find an article or just something that we could all learn about?
I'll take some of that.
Okay, thanks, Gary. That's great. All right. You think we've covered as much as we can on this one tonight?
Yeah.
All right. Good. Well, those are our two main items, and we're gonna move into member comments.
Did that count as signage, the tiled entryway that says jammed? Are they, is that figured into their signage?
The tile that, mean the floor?
Yeah. It's a sign.
Got a message says jam.
There's a slippery slope, isn't there?
You know.
All right, take your
Just,
point.
just going out there and covering all the bases.
Are there any member comments? I've got a couple news items.
Like, I prefer to believe that merchants, realtors, whomever have the common sense to know what they want to put in the windows of their stores. I mean, the fact that Aldi's is completely covered with stuffed animals and what have you is really none of my business. That's how I feel. Any more than 15 years from now, our kids will be sitting here arguing about what color we should let them paint their houses. I don't want to have any part of this.
Okay. Take your point. All right, good discussion. Here's a couple news items. There's a development in the Michigan legislature. There's a bill that we've been tracking. It had passed the House and now it's moved into the Senate, and it has to do with planning commissions, and it would be it would be an update to the Michigan Planning and Enabling Act, which is what governs planning commissions. And under this bill, a representative of housing would join the major interests currently listed for a planning commission, including commerce, agriculture, recreation, education, public health, government, industry, and population. So a town or an entity strives to have different interests represented on their planning commissions, different areas of expertise and different interests. And so now they're saying that if this bill were to pass and the two were to become law, then a planning commission would have to have someone representing housing interests, whatever that may be.
I think there's also language in that states that our master plan would have to include a housing analysis or housing study to show what our needs were. Yeah.
So no action required, but we're tracking that bill to see if the planning commission is going to have to be updated with, a new member, or if we're going to have to do something with the master plan in the short time. And then the final news item, remember we talked about the different planning commissions in our neighboring areas, how we have some commonalities. And last night, the West Traverse Township Planning Commission met, and they're recommending to allow chickens in residential areas.
God bless them.
And that moves on to the township board, maybe next month or the month after. So we'll see how they do. So some commonalities.
Is that free range or?
I don't know all the rules. All right, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.